The Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. Chapter 32. A Journey of Self-Discovery and Rank Up. Vandaloo was on his third day of rest, but the undead titans were busy at work, as if making up for all the time they had spent idle up until now. Lumberjacks cut trees. Holding their axes in both hands, the Titans swung them into the trunk of a large tree. And then the tree, the ant, the monster that the tree had transformed into, screamed. The Titans took no notice of the ant swinging its branches around as a final act of resistance, and in the end, the felling of the ant was complete. "Boss, what are we doing with this tree?" "Put it down where we're gathering the timber. The holy sun is resting for now." "Roger." The undead titans cut off the ant's smaller branches and carried these along with the trunk to the place where the timber was being gathered. These titans had been lumberjacks while they were alive, and even though they were now only made of bones and rotting flesh, they worked at a brisk pace. "We have to hurry and exterminate all of the other monsters in Talosheim. Yeah, since the Holy Sun is here now. I want to hurry and go get salt." They were working to clear the outer districts of Talosheim, which were being encroached upon by the forest of the Devil's Nests outside, and turn them back into ruins. Vandaloo, the Holy Sun, had told them that he would repair the buildings of Talosheim and restore them to their original state. "Show him how we work." With the former lumberjacks leading the way, the Titans defeated the monsters attacking them to defend their territory one after another, cutting down the trees as they went. Before the Titans had discovered the tunnel leading into Duke Hartner's territory in the Orbaum Kingdom, Talosheim had been a city-nation, isolated from the outside world by the Boundary Mountain Range. The royal capital's population was 5,000, and there were only 3 small villages with populations numbering in the hundreds. Other than the capable adventurers like Sword King Borkus and the Knights Order of the Church led by the Saint Gina, there were no specialized military personnel or battle technicians. All of the soldiers, including the city guards, did those duties as their secondary occupation. They normally worked as miners or fishermen. Upon learning this, one would think that even for a country of titans who were born with great physical strength and sturdy bodies, their military strength was too low. But the reality was different. All of Talosheim's industries were dependent on the Devil's Nests and dungeons, other than its agriculture. Lumberjacks gathered lumber by felling ents, trents, and high trents in the Devil's Nests and dungeons. Fishermen hunted aquatic monsters using tridents. Even miners would obtain metals from veins in the Devil's Nest and dungeons that were crawling with monsters. So they had to fight and defeat the monsters in their way on their own. The vast majority of Talosheim's population of 5,000 was made of capable fighters, possessing battle-related skills. Even the farmers, who should have been an exception to this, possessed enough fighting strength to kill any dangerous wild beasts that went after their crops with their bare hands. They were not to be laughed at. After learning these facts about Talosheim, Vandaloo and the ghouls wondered, why did the Shield Nation pick a fight with a country like this? After all, over 90% of Talosheim's 5,000 citizens were combatants capable of killing a soldier in the Merg army with a single attack. Such powerful enemies would be waiting for them in a sturdy fortress of a city. It was as clear as day that any country that attempted to capture Talosheim would suffer several times the number of losses that the Titans would. Talosheim had few mages capable of using the Titans' unique magic, and Titans possessed little affinity for the various attributes of magic. But even the Merg Shield Nation's army was largely made of knights and soldiers. They didn't have many mages either. The Merg Shield Nation and the Amid Empire behind it seemed to have dispatched their troops after only looking at Talosheim's exterior appearance. They certainly hadn't done any detailed analysis on the city. As a result, though the Merg Shield Nation had been victorious, it suffered historically unprecedented losses, including the loss of a magic spear that was a national treasure. It was a foolish-sounding story, but regardless of these past events, the undead Titans continued to clear Talosheim of non-undead monsters. Around this time, Vandaloo was in the ruins of the Adventurers Guild, reading a book. The archives of the Church of Vida and the small branch of the Mages Guild had either been set alight or plundered, but the archives of this place had been left alone. Even now, 200 years later, there were numerous books that were still intact. The church had probably been burned down because of religious reasons behind the war, and though the Mages Guild was small, there was a chance that those of the guild had been conducting their own research, so the archives had been plundered. But there had been no reason to destroy the archives of the Adventurers Guild. Well, it could have simply been because the Merg Shield Nation had been forced to retreat before they were able to. And one of the undead Titans had told Vandaloo that there should be a book in these archives about Dhampirs. Incidentally, there had been a magic item left in the Adventurers Guild that was able to issue registration cards for those registered with the guild, but it could not be activated. It seemed that only guild personnel could use it. If Vandaloo had been able to register himself here, he would have been able to become an adventurer while keeping his title, skills, and mana pool hidden, but life wasn't always easy. But investigating the details about his own race was more important. I can finally learn some things about myself. Vandaloo did not know anything about himself other than the fact that he was born between the subordinate vampire Valen and the dark elf Darcia. He had always wanted to find out more about himself if he had the chance. First, he wanted to find out about his life expectancy so he would know how long he could be expected to live. This would allow him to plan his life out. In the unlikely event that his life expectancy was shorter than a human's, it would be a big problem. He could extend his lifespan using youth transformation on himself, but if Dhampirs turned out to be creatures that lived without aging and then suddenly died when they reached their 30th birthday, that would be problematic. It was unlikely, but Vandaloo wanted to know, just in case. I can finally read it. Vandaloo's eyes followed the text as he inhaled the scent of old paper. He learned that Dhampirs had the special characteristic of inheriting the qualities of their parents very strongly. The pattern of inheritance apparently grew stronger when both parents belonged to races created by Vida. So that means I have quite a bit of talent in unarmed fighting and archery, just like my parents. It was possible that Vandaloo had an aptitude for archery like Darcia, and Valen's unarmed fighting techniques that relied on his claws. It was unlikely that he would be able to use spiritual magic, however, as he did not possess an affinity for the other attributes of magic. That would always be true, unless spirits of the death attribute, which had never existed before, suddenly started appearing. Lemures were familiars created using Vandalu's mana. They did not count as spirits. Could it be I've inherited Father's resistance to the sun as well? In that case, won't I be fine making my body structure more vampire-like by using blood-sucking to drink more blood? Newborn Dampiers possessed none of the weaknesses of vampires, but repeatedly using blood-sucking made their constitutions more like their vampire parents. As a cost to the power they gained by doing so, they gained the vampire's weaknesses as well. However, Vandalu's father had been a man known to be resistant to the sun, and apparently subordinate vampires only possessed special vampire abilities related to the body, but they also possessed none of the vampire's other weaknesses. This meant that Vandalu could obtain the vampire's power at no risk to himself. All right, I'll drink lots of blood from now on. Up until now, he had succumbed to the temptation of drinking the blood of the monsters whenever their corpses were being drained of blood. There was no particular reason to resist this temptation, and if it led to him gaining power, there was really no reason to hesitate to drink it. If he became able to fight with his claws like his father, his mother would probably be happy as well. And the main thing, the lifespan is dependent on the race of the parent that isn't a vampire? That was what had been written. The way Dampiers lived varied greatly depending on their parents, and their lifespans also varied depending on the race of the non-vampire parent. If the parent was a human with a lifespan of 100 years, the Dampier would live between 3 to 500 years. If the parent was a dwarf with a lifespan of 200 years, the Dampier would live between 600 and 1,000 years old. If the parent was an elf with a lifespan of 500 years, the Dampier would live between 1,500 to 2,000 years. As a general rule, it seemed to be 3 and 5 times the lifespan of the non-vampire parent's race. Incidentally, all of these values had been deducted by researchers of the distant past, who used life attribute magic to investigate multiple Dampier specimens. The information's authenticity was a little questionable. However, it seemed that Vandalu would be able to live for a long time, as long as he was not killed. Now that I think about it, how long do dark elves live? Vandalu wanted to ask Darcia, but she was currently asleep inside of her bone fragment. He wandered around the archives, wondering if there might be a book written about dark elves, and fortunately he happened to find the book he was looking for. About a third of it had been rendered unreadable by mold, but he was able to find out the piece of information that he wanted. Dark elves were born as a race that the goddess Veda hoped would be stronger than elves, so all of their abilities are superior to those of elves. As such, their lifespans are long. They can live for 1,000 years, in contrast to the 500-year lifespan of elves. At worst, Vandalu could live 3,000 years, at best 5,000. As long as he survived, he could become a living witness to history. A length of time longer than the entire Christian era. I can't imagine it. His sense of time was just as it had been when he was a human, so he imagined that it could even become difficult to live for so long. At the very least, it seemed that it would be some time before he lived through the 4th lifetime promised to him by Rodcourt. I wonder what that god was thinking when he reincarnated me as a Dampier. Well, he cursed me so that I would commit suicide in despair. I'm sure he didn't think about things like lifespans. In fact, if he hadn't been able to use death attribute magic, he would have been finished the moment Darcia died. He wouldn't have had to go even as far as to commit suicide. He simply would have starved to death. Even in the book, it had been written that the majority of Dhampirs died long before they reached the end of their lifespan. Considering that, Vandaloo could understand why he had been reincarnated as a Dhampir. Now then, I wonder if there's a book about adventurers. The Talosheim branch of the Adventurers Guild was supposedly set up here by the Orbaum Kingdom's Adventurer Guild, so the systems used by the Talosheim branch should be mostly the same. The documents here were from 200 years ago, but since many races, like dwarves and titans, lived for over 200 years, things should be mostly the same, other than some minor details. If the system had changed drastically in the past 200 years, Vandaloo would just have to consider himself unfortunate. Here it is. It seems to be mostly the same as the Merg Shield Nations Guild. The system and rules weren't much different from what he had heard from Kachia and the spirits of the adventurers that he had killed. It seemed that the guilds were the same even when they were in different countries. There were two differences. The first was the treatment of races created by Vida, and the other was regarding the training school for adventurers. In the Orbaum Kingdom's Adventurers Guild, some of the races created by Vida, such as Dark Elves and Titans, were treated as people. However, the races created when Vida procreated with monsters, such as Lamias, Skyla, Arachne, devils, Oni, and notably vampires, were generally considered monsters. This was because these races often harmed humans or had long histories of conflict against human countries. However, some friendly clans of these races also existed, and it was forbidden to harm members of clans that the nation had declared to be allied clans. Even though they're enemies with the Amid Empire, the way they treat the races created by Vida isn't the exact opposite, huh? Considering the fact that the Orbaum Kingdom had been trading commercially with Talosheim, it was difficult to imagine that the goddess Vida was thought of in a very negative way. And the Orbaum Kingdom's relationship with each of the other races may have changed in the last 200 years. For now, Vandaloo decided that he would ask about these things once he entered human society. The next thing is regarding the Adventurers Training School. I never imagined I'd be going back to school in another world. In the Orbaum Kingdom's guilds, there were educational institutions that trained adventurers, though such institutions did not exist in the Adventurers Guild of the Amid Empire and its nations. That was because the Orbaum Kingdom had more adventurers, and also more devil's nests and dungeons where adventurers worked. Of course, the fact that being an adventurer came with occupational hazards was the same in the Orbaum Kingdom. If an inexperienced adventurer went on a reckless adventure and died, the responsibility was not on the country or the guild. People who became adventurers were people with great confidence in their abilities, or those who were very poor. Orphans, those who had lost their jobs while still young, or the third or fourth sons of farming or merchant families who had no chance of succeeding the family business. Those kinds of people. Though this was cruel to say, they were such people that society would not suffer a great loss if they died. However, in the distant past, a vast majority of newly registered adventurers died within a year of registration, and many retired before reaching D-class or higher. It would be problematic if the Adventurers Guild was to build up a negative reputation due to these statistics, and the number of capable adventurers stopped increasing. If the poor saw no hope in becoming adventurers and decided to turn to crime instead, that would also cause great problems for the nation. In addition to this, if there were not enough people to thin the monster populations in the devil's nests, not only would there be a shortage of valuable monster materials, but the monster populations could even overflow, jeopardizing the nation's safety. And so the nation provided funds for adventurers' training schools to be established. The idea was to teach them at least a certain level of knowledge, train their fighting abilities, and thus reduce the rate of casualties among new adventurers. The experiment was a great success. The rate of newly registered adventurers dying within a year of their registration dropped by 80%, and the ratio of adventurers making it to D class and above increased several times over. In addition, the nation was able to use exceptional adventurers as special escorts and privately employed mages. Only good had come out of the establishment of these training schools. After reading this far, Vandaloo looked up from the book. I guess I'm a bad person for thinking that this sounds a bit suspicious. He could understand the rate of adventurers dying within a year of their registration decreasing, but what about the rate of adventurers dying within the second year? Just how much had the ratio of adventurers reaching D class or above increased by? In the first place, why were there no specific numbers given in the information? Well, whatever. The reason Vandaloo wanted to become an adventurer wasn't because of his ideals or because it was just his dream. It was merely the simplest way to secure himself a position in society. And he could even earn money by doing what he had been doing up until now, hunting monsters and bandits. Most importantly, it was the occupation that most easily allowed him to make a name for himself. And so Vandaloo ignored the dark side of the Adventurers Guild that he was starting to see, and lowered his gaze once more to read what had been written about the Adventurers' training school system. The schools were credit-based, and one could attend between 1 and 3 years. As long as one earned the minimum number of credits and had the headmaster's permission, he or she could graduate at any time. There weren't any particular requirements to enroll at the schools. Only the entrance fees and tuition fees needed to be paid. There was even a deferred payment system for those who could not pay these fees in advance, where they would pay the fees off after graduating. And the most important thing for Vandaloo was how the school system dealt with minors. However, minors cannot advance to F class or above if they have not graduated from an adventurer's training school. In the Adventurers Guild, adventurers were separated into 8 classes, based on their abilities and past achievements. The lowest, G class, were newcomers who possessed only their registration cards. The only requests they could accept were non-combat related requests in the city, what would be referred to as manual labor in Japan. Even the pay was worse than in Japan. Requests that could possibly include combat, even if they were requests like gathering medicinal plants outside, could only be accepted at F class or above. Basically, if I want to aim higher and gain money and fame, I have to attend the Adventurers Training School since I'm underage. As Vandaloo was currently almost 3 years of age, he was, of course, a minor. He had decided that he would only go to the Orbomb Kingdom after obtaining the resurrection device beneath Talosheim's royal castle and reviving Darcia, but he had no intention of spending more than 10 years doing that. Therefore, he would definitely still be a minor by the time he registered at the Adventurers Guild. School. I wonder if I can live an enjoyable life this time. He had no confidence at all to say that he could. During his childhood on Earth, even his uncle was forced to allow him to receive compulsory education, and when he was on the verge of entering high school, his uncle had pressured him, saying, "You're only allowed to choose from public high schools, and if you fail your exam, then go and work." But even so, Vandaloo had managed to attend high school. However, because of his family environment around the time he was attending elementary school, he was unable to invite friends over to play, and he could not even go outside to others' houses to play because he was scared of his uncle's fists. And he could not make any friends in the first place because of his strange behavior due to his abnormal emotional state. On top of that, the teachers did not think highly of him either, and though his grades were normal, there was an image of him being a problematic child. Things never changed as he entered middle school, and by the time he entered high school and was able to rebel against his uncle to some extent, he had already given up on a bright, enjoyable school life. Would he be able to make friends at this school? He still had no confidence that he would be able to interact well with anyone other than the undead and ghouls. I can attract attention as a user of a newly discovered type of magic and become someone that my schoolmates look up to. No, I can't imagine that. He could only imagine his magic causing himself to be alienated and isolated even further. I'm fine with being a loner. It's not like there are going to be any flashy school events, and since it's a credit-based system, if I don't find it enjoyable, I can just get the minimum credits and graduate right away. And then all he would need to do was gather money and fame by going hunting for monsters in dungeons with Sam and the other undead, right? He had plenty of friends. He was the Ghoul King after all. In fact, wasn't he quite socially successful? Building up such defensive walls in his heart, he closed the book. He really didn't want to go to school. As he decided to go and play with Bone Man and the others to distract himself from his dark mood and put the book back in its place, another book caught his sight by chance. A Study on the Undead? Vandaloo picked that book up and decided to continue reading. The undead created by Vandaloo, including Bone Man, played and trained around Sam when not fighting. They would have practice battles against each other, dodging stones thrown at them by Bone Monkey, and enjoy Bone Bird's acrobatic flying displays. Vandaloo called out to Bone Man, who had been left behind by his companions as the only one unable to surpass rank 3. I found a way that might be able to make you stronger today, so I'm thinking of trying it out. With a bow on his back, a sword at his hip, and the leather armor and shield as his defense, Bone Man looked like a splendid skeleton soldier, but the spirits inhabiting his bones were those of rats. Perhaps because of this, Bone Man's swordsmanship and shield technique skills were still at level 1, and he seemed unable to increase them any further. After reading the book, Vandaloo thought this might be the same reason that he was still rank 3, even though he had reached level 100. There are a number of conditions that might need to be met to create a powerful undead. The most common of these is the spirits inhabiting the dead body to match the body itself, or otherwise possess a good affinity with it. In Lambda, there are cases where even after a dead body reanimated to become an undead, the spirit inhabiting the body is not the original owner of that body. Not only would the body be inhabited by somebody else's spirit, but it is common for it to be inhabited by the spirits of small animals rather than a human. But in such cases, it would generally be a weak rank 1 or 2 undead. A human spirit possessing the corpse of a beast would not suddenly gain the beast's reflexes or fighting instincts. In fact, it would take a lot of its effort to try and move in a body with different bone structure. And if that beast possessed body parts that humans do not have, such as long tails, wings, or a second head, the human spirit would have too much to deal with. It was the same when animal spirits inhabited a human's body. They wouldn't be able to use its hands correctly unless they were very intelligent animals, and the spirit of quadrupedal animals would find it difficult to walk on two legs. Using tools would be out of the question. Perhaps it would be easier to imagine it as putting the brain of a human in a beast, and putting the brain of a beast in a human. Considering that, the rat spirits inside Bone Man could be considered exceptionally skilled. It wouldn't have been an exaggeration to call them geniuses among rats. Rats use their front paws skillfully, but even so, being able to use a bow and arrows, a sword and a shield, was impressive. The rat spirits were clearly more intelligent than the average goblin. But unfortunately, there was a limit to their abilities. Well, since they were spirits, they could probably overcome those limits given hundreds of years, but Vandaloo was not willing to wait that long. And so Vandaloo thought, since Bone Man is a human's body with a rat's brain in it, if I add a human spirit into it, doesn't that solve the problem? He would carefully select human spirits whose bodies had died long ago, whose empty souls wouldn't contain any personalities, emotions, or memories. Fortunately, this place was a historical battlefield, and it was simple to gather such spirits. Now then, I'm going to add more spirits. As Vandaloo inserted the fragments of spirits, Bone Man's body absorbed more and more, like a sponge soaking up water. Bone Man did not seem to be suffering. In fact, his jawbone was clicking in pleasure, and the fire in his eye sockets was flickering, so Vandaloo added more and more. Bone Wolf growled. Gah! Bone Bird shrieked. As Bone Wolf and Bone Bird watched their companion with curiosity, more spirits began to possess the human bones that made up Bone Man's body. And then it suddenly happened. Seeing something click into place, it was the sensation of puzzle pieces being thrown randomly in a box and coming together by coincidence to complete the puzzle. Oh, Lord, my Lord. Bone Man's body did not show any obvious changes, like his body starting to glow or releasing an ominous presence, and its appearance was still that of a skeleton soldier. But somehow the dull rat-like noises he had been making were replaced by spoken words. Could it be that your rank has increased? Some monsters' intelligence drastically increases when their rank increases, though there are many cases where adventurers mistakenly attribute this to being the result of the experience gained by the monsters from leveling up, or becoming smarter as a result of studying. But there are monsters that suddenly become able to use magic or speak words after leveling up. Many of those are undead. The reason for this was that the souls become accustomed to the dead bodies they inhabit and regain their memories and techniques. Chew, my lord. Bone Man gave a rat-like squeak instead of a yes in reply to Vandaloo's question as he nodded. Because of your divine work, my lord, my rank has increased, and I have become a rank 4 skeleton knight. He spoke in a rich, flowing baritone voice that would likely be terrifying if he were to shout. The squeaking at the end of his sentence was a little disappointing, however. But where had his manner of speech come from? His movements were unexpectedly refined. Perhaps there had been some knights of the Merg Shield Nation among the spirit fragments that Vandaloo had put into him, and that was the source of this. Vandaloo thought that he had carefully selected empty souls so that Bone Man would not be taken over by some strange malice or hatred, but it was possible that their memories had been restored when they fused with the spirits already inside Bone Man. It seemed that the death attribute charm was still taking its full effect, but if he were to behave like a knight of the Merg Shield Nation, that might cause trouble with Borkus and the other undead titans of Talosheim. Well then, have you regained your memories of your past life? When Vandaloo asked to make sure, Bone Man nodded and replied, "Chew! I remember. It happened when I returned to my family with food to feed them. It attacked me and caught me by surprise. Unable to use any techniques, I was tormented, toyed around with, and then it abandoned me without even finishing me off. It had already satisfied itself after killing my family. Tormenting me was nothing but amusement. That fiendish cat." Chew! Cats do those sorts of things, don't they? The idea that humans are the only ones that take lives needlessly. Upon hearing Bone Man's story, Vandaloo learned that this idea was only a fantasy. Leaving that aside, it seemed that the spirit fragments had only affected the tone of Bone Man's voice. He seemed to have no memories of the Merg Shield Nation, so there was nothing to worry about. Incidentally, Vandaloo liked both dogs and cats, and owning a pet one day was one of his dreams. But don't kill cats needlessly. Chew! Certainly, my lord. It was good that Bone Man was so obedient. A future mass murderer of domestic cats in the Orbomb Kingdom had been avoided. Vandaloo was not sure whether there were domesticated dogs and cats in Lambda, however. Most of the day had already passed, so Vandaloo spent some time playing with Bone Man and the other undead. He enjoyed himself, throwing monster bones for Bone Wolf and Bone Bear to compete over and fetch, grabbing onto Bone Bird's legs to take a leisurely flight around the sky, and being groomed by Bone Monkey. "Joe!" screamed Bone Man. Saria and Rita, who had returned from hunting, probably tilted their heads in confusion at the sight of Bone Man sprinting at full speed, letting out a war cry, though they could not do so physically or visibly. "Bone-chan, Bone Man is running. Why is that? Some kind of training? It wouldn't be something like that, would it?" Bone Man's cardiopulmonary function would not increase by running around at full speed. I had an idea to build this, and he seems to have taken a liking to it." "Why?" "The rat spirits that act as Bone Man's base probably had some hamster-like traits." "Ham-stir? As in star?" Translator's note: the last part of hamster is suta, which sounds like star. Inside a hamster wheel that Vandaloo had thought to build by using golem transmutation on some spare wood, Bone Man happily spent the next short while running to his heart's content. Bone Man's rank increased after having new spirits added. Normally, skeleton knights are monsters created by knights becoming undead after death. Bone Man's base is made of rat spirits, but the fact that it has sworn loyalty to a specific person, and the fact that the new spirits added to it included those of knights, have caused it to become a skeleton knight. Though his outward appearance is no different, his attribute values and intelligence have increased significantly. And though he previously could not level up some skills no matter how much experience he gained, he can now do so. In addition, he has gained the passive function of the night job, enhanced attribute values, loyalty. This skill enhances the attribute values of the bearer as long as the bearer obeys the commands of the person he or she has sworn to serve, usually a lord. In Bone Man's case, this lord is Vandaloo. Skeleton Knights often possess martial and commanding skills at a high level and can become a rank 5 skeleton general or a rank 6 skeleton lord by commanding subordinates. But in cases where they are employed, before or after death, by someone who rules an entire nation, such as a king or emperor, they can become undead with court ranks attached to their names, such as Skeleton Baron